to today's College Sports Communicators live webinar. We're pleased to offer this session on working with football statistics and stat rules. We thank you for joining us for this important session as we're in the heart of football season, and as we discuss ways to assist CSC members in all areas of preparing to be a game day football statistician and the game's rules and statistical rules you need to follow. Our presenters today are leading college football and professional statisticians, and they are here to offer their thoughts and expertise and take your questions throughout today's discussion. As we welcome your questions at any time, please place them in the chat function of Zoom. Reminder that this is not a how-to training on using stat software programs like NCAA Live Stats or Presto Stats. This is about the actual work involved in statting college football. So without further ado, my name is Ira Thor, Associate Vice President for University Communications and Marketing at New Jersey City University. I'm a former 20-year SID and former board member, and on Football Sundays, the crew chief and head statistician for Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. I will serve as the webinar moderator for today. As a reminder, we are recording this webinar, and later on, it'll be posted on both the CSC website and YouTube page, so you can watch it later on demand. Please also invite any CSC colleagues who have not been able to tune in live to listen and watch this later as well. So we have a lot to go over, and to get started, first of all, we appreciate everybody joining us today. We have a great group of panels today with years of experience. Let me quickly introduce them. First, Scott Fishman is a Genius Sports business analyst and the game day stat crew director for Brent Harris's Indianapolis Colts. Stan Granch is the stat king of Los Angeles, where he serves as the head statistician for both USC football and UCLA football. John Painter is a legend in our business. He has served at 3 different levels, so he has a plethora of experience. He's currently at NCAA Division III with Maryville College in Tennessee, where he is the assistant AD for communications. And everybody needs a friend at NCAA headquarters, and we have a great one today with Jeff Williams joining us, the NCAA Associate Director for Media Coordination and Statistics. So thank all you gentlemen for joining us today. And we'll dive into our discussion. And I think the good place to start is the personnel that you need to keep stats at different levels, right? You know, I'm obviously blessed at the NFL level where I have 7 people that are able to be assigned to me on game days. And throughout this, I'll mention some things that we do that actually can be used at the college level where the staffing levels are obviously much less. But how about we talk about first, what do you need to be able to do your job as a statistician? Some of it people may know already, but some of it they may not have thought of. We'll start with Stan, since you get 2 teams.
Well, I have 2 big teams, so I'm blessed like you at the staffing like the NFL. I've got myself. I call the entire game, especially the offensive part. I have the college game moves very fast, so I have 2 guys helping me on offense. I have 2 guys helping me on defense, and we have 2 guys that just do participation. And then of course we have the computer entry. We just do everything on pencil and paper because the computer sometimes gets a glitch, gets behind. When we had the older program, it just deleted the whole game and we had to start over. So I actually have something called a drive chart that I can reproduce the game from start to finish. So that's something that I do. But staffing wise, I'm blessed. Like I said, I've got eight people that, in my case, everybody's got 10 plus years of experience too.
How about John, since you have certainly worked at 3 different levels and seen all kinds of staffing needs?
It was fun. It was fun watching, Stan type operation work, when at Tennessee, and we obviously supported that, with helpful corrections here and there, maybe misidentifications, especially when we were on the road. Since then at Colgate and now at Maryville, we're doing the best we can. We don't have the benefit of a big staff, but we do take advantage of the practice runs and the preseason. That's always been super helpful to us. when we're starting new folks. And, we're there doing the best we can. Our goal is to be the most unbiased, press box staff in the country. That's what all of our goals is. And we want to have, thank goodness we're at Maryville today, because we'll be taken care of there. And so that's just what we shoot for every day. It's simple, I know, but that's my first priority.
And that's an ultimate compliment when somebody knows that they can go to your school and they'll be well taken care of. What about tools of the trade? Obviously, depending on where you are, and if you're in a bigger stadium, you're further away. Binoculars, I think we all stress this. A lot of people think that they could just sit there without binoculars and they'll be fine. But particularly on tackles where it gets very tight in there, it's an underestimated tool that is really helpful on game days.
Yeah, I think definitely. Sorry. Yeah, I think definitely on game days too, especially again, knowing all these press boxes and everyone's trying to sell suites in these days. Sometimes they've moved the stat crews to the end zone and you don't have a good view and you're going to have to use binoculars. Again, we all want to be at the 50-yard line, but we know that that's not always possible. So whenever possible, again, have some binoculars and then use video. Again, we know most games are streamed, but not every game is streamed, but having that video replay alongside you right now is a key valuable component to have.
So I'll describe what I have in the NFL. And obviously, I don't expect this to be at the college level, but while I'm our crew chief for the Jets, we have both an offensive and defensive caller, which I think is the basics that every college game day staff should have, right? You shouldn't have the same person watching offense and defense. There's just too many things that could happen. As was mentioned by Stan, we call it the scribe is important because, technology does go down as good as Genius is and Stacker before it does go down. So it's important to have that. And something, as it was just touched on with video, that I would personally recommend. We have in the NFL a live DVR, so I can, rewind and fast forward and really dive into the nuances of each play. But I think it's helpful, as just mentioned, that every game is basically streamed now at every level, to have, even if it's a student that may not be calling, sitting there, the game is on 7 to 10 second delay, watching every play that is not plain as day obvious, particularly on the tackle side or on the target side sometime. So you always have somebody who's keeping an eye on it, and during a dead ball can say, hey, I think it was actually number 15 on the tackle, and can show you where it is. That way you're able to stay alive in the game, but also have somebody watching for potential problems. How do you guys handle participation during games, and how do you handle double numbers, which obviously are the bane of a lot of our existence?
Yeah, I have 135 on my roster, so I've got a few double numbers. I don't have the benefit of participation help usually. So that's just really working with coaches the next day. And that's like that on the road. I don't usually get to go on the road. Occasionally I can, but with home events, I can't do that here at this level. So it's just working with your coaches and working with the home SIDs, and knowing that on Sundays, hey, we're going to get our participation straight, and letting your coaches know that, hey, don't be changing numbers on me. You can't change numbers on me. We've got to stay with these numbers. I understand we have a lot of players, but they've got to stay in those jerseys and let me know if they need to change, because I've got to change it about, 5 or 6 places. And so just having that relationship with the coaches.
Stan, Scott, Jeff, before we jump into our next topic, just any other follow-up advice on crew setup and key equipment pieces to consider?
Yeah, one thing I would say, just to, and I know I'm not always on the front lines, although I've done my fair share of statistics, both around here in Indianapolis and elsewhere. But you hear a lot of this conversation, and we're talking about offensive callers, defensive callers, scribes and things like that. And I know a lot of people maybe don't have that kind of staff, but a lot of times what you can do is have somebody, in some ways, double up on some of that. Maybe your caller can write down. Can be the scribe as well, especially if that caller really knows the software and knows how to input the software. They can shorthand a lot of that information and just write down what it is that needs to be entered. so that if you do have to go back, you can enter that. So don't be afraid of those kinds of things of making that offensive caller a scribe, or making your defensive caller write some things down as well, because I think it gets a little scary when you hear some of these, some people have a lot bigger crews or whatever, but obviously not everybody has that same aspect of being able to have that many people. So there's certainly ways to get around it with fewer people. I've done it with as few as 2 people. Certainly 2 or 3 is better. 2's a challenge because like Ira said, it's better to have somebody watching defense by themselves. But certainly it can be done. It's not impossible.
Yeah, when I first started doing this 23 years ago, first game I ever inputted was just me on input and Joe DeBenedictis from sidearm as the caller, and we got through it. It's not ideal to do it with 2, but I think in today's world with Genius, with so many things that we have to be entering, I think the minimum that should be on any game day is 3.
Yeah.
Offense, defensive caller, and inputter. We do have a question I do want to answer, and I'll turn this one over to either Scott or Stan. This is from an attendee wants to know, how do you handle duplicate numbers, especially when the visiting SID doesn't indicate which one is offense and defense?
Ooh, okay. Most of the time for us, duplicate numbers tend to be an issue on special teams, because you're trying to guess which 2 that was or which 7 that was. But then, some teams have the number or the name on the back of the jersey. That's certainly a blessing to try to catch that. Otherwise, you try to look at the description. Hopefully one guy's 5'10" and the other guy's 6'4", so you can sort of figure it out that way. Then you're just making your best guess sometimes. I mean, at the Division I level, everybody's pretty much identified if they're a defensive back or wide receiver, but that doesn't necessarily help me on special teams. And yeah, we definitely rely on the visiting SID to tell us which number 2 that was. And I try to have that conversation with them before the game, like, hey, we're going to make some guesses here. And if you heard we made an incorrect guess, just tell us, so yeah, if the visiting SID is not helping you, you're already off to a bad start. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, and I think something else you can do is, and I had this happen to me over the weekend, is I had a game where the starting long snapper was number 8. The backup was also number 8. So like Stan said, I went to talk to the SID and I'm like, your coach made you do this? He's like, I tried my hardest, and we understand that. But again, luckily one was 6'5" and one was 5'8", so we were able to figure it out. But it also helps too when at the smaller levels, when the visiting SID is not there, go talk to the visiting radio broadcaster. They're a great resource to be there because they know their players just as much as the SID does, sometimes even more when guys like John can't travel. So make friends with the radio broadcaster, talk to them at the end of the quarter, at end of halftime when they have their break. You can usually figure out who it is.
And have the visiting SID's cell phone number handy for calls and or text messages for more immediate answers if you need it throughout the game. We'll move on to our next topic, which is communication with the NCAA. Jeff Williams, couldn't think of anybody better than you for this. Can you talk about what is needed as a football SID, what you need?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the biggest thing is planning and up front. And I would say this probably goes back to the duplicate number conversation that you're just having too, because that could be helpful too. There's duplicate numbers for that opposing team. The SID is not coming. Maybe have a conversation with them ahead of time to get an idea of who those are. But from our standpoint, a big thing is probably the biggest thing, the thing that we spend the most time in communication with or having issues with that schools reach out to us about is making sure the rosters are up to date in our system, making sure schedules are up to date, game times are up to date. That's a really big component for us. If those things are, if the roster is up to date, obviously it's going to, if you're using the NCAA live stats, the Genius system, that's going to make it that much easier for the school on site. If you're not the host, if your opponent is hosting that game, or if it's a neutral site host, it makes it a lot easier for them if it's up to date in the NCAA system, because obviously it's being fed there. Post game wise, making sure that the information is submitted, finalized, I think we're going to talk a little bit later about post-game edits, so I won't get too much into that. But just making sure those games, get finalized, get submitted, even if it's just getting on and checking to make sure that we receive the data. That's really helpful. And a couple other things I would mention. We have a stat manual for every year. If you're not aware of it, www.ncaa.org/statistics is a place to start to get that stats manual. Print that out, have that handy, take a look at it before the season, especially if you're new to doing football stats. Things as simple as that may seem as simple as spotting the ball. Make sure you understand how to spot the ball, that if it's on the yard line, that's the yard line that the ball is on. But if it's in between yard line, it always goes to the next, advances to the next yard line. Making sure you understand those things, those basic concepts, obviously is going to make it a lot easier when you get in front of it. Because if you understand the basics and all you have to worry about are those plays are a little weird, you're already got a good head start. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing. Making sure you get the things done up front, schedules, rosters, that sort of thing, and then making sure that you've done some legwork to kind of really understand the basics of how to do the stats would probably be the next thing.
And John, before we jump into some of the scoring topics that we want to get to, can you just talk about as a visiting SID in a game, what you send to schools regarding travel rosters, particularly when you have a roster that could be 130 or greater, as we know happens quite frankly.
For sure. We play at Brevard this week. I've got my word roster, as I said, is 135 players. So when I get the travel roster from the coach, I will send Brevard a shortened word roster of 70, 75, whatever. That's going to eliminate a lot of the double number issues, a lot of them. And there'll still be some, but not nearly as many. So I'll send that to them as part of the little packet I send them with our stats and some notes and stuff like that. Especially since I can't be there. But yeah, that's going to be super helpful. And the same with the NCAA. Be a good citizen with the NCAA and have your rosters updated. I mean, Jeff's smiling, but it's 100% right. I mean, if you do that, then when they open it up there at their game site, you're good to go. So there's no mistakes.
And one other bit of advice that I'll give, just because I've been there, have backup internet. There are times where your internet will go. I can tell you it has happened at MetLife Stadium in the middle of a Giant and Jet game that the internet goes out. So if it could happen at that level, it could happen anywhere. Have backup internet, particularly when you're using something like Genius, which is obviously internet-based. If the campus Wi-Fi, the campus hardwire goes down, have a backup plan that you're ready to deploy pretty quickly. And it could be as simple as a hotspot or your cell phone.
That's a good idea. I want to add one thing, Ira. Another thing I send, and I didn't make this up, I saw this, but it's a great thing, is I send to my home SID what to set for the cheat tabs, the little part in there in the NCAA live stats. I say, hey, here are my quarterbacks, here are my running backs, here are my sack, so I try to send that to them so that way they don't have to grab my stats and try to guess. That's just a little, it probably saves them 2 minutes.
So we'll turn now over to preparing the input. Scott Fishman, I'll bring you in for this part. A number of different things that we could talk about here. Let's start with how do you test in pregame to make sure you're ready to go?
So yeah, there's a lot of things I like to do. I definitely, first off, test my printer. Again, the last thing you want to do is get to the end of the first quarter and you can't print anything. Another thing I like to do, again, with live stats, we offer a test environment. So you can obviously switch over to that and do a test game there. Test out the clock if you're using the clock. Test out all the functionality. Make sure your roster's working. And obviously with other stat programs too, you can make up games and put them in, test them out, check your rosters, make sure your rosters look the same. Obviously, in some of the old stat programs, you had to make sure you had the right team code and stuff, so it's pulling the correct roster. So you just want to make sure you have all the correct players, make sure your clock's working, your scoreboard's working, your printer's working. The internet is huge. Again, depending on what program. You can also work with your live stats provider. Obviously, stat broadcast, you can do test games. Same thing with sidearm and Presto. You can set up testing, because the last thing you want to do is get to the beginning of the game and have no live stats available. And now you have both the home SID, visiting SID, and 20 media members coming into your stat booth while you're trying to stat plays, asking you where are the live stats.
How about preparing for a play, knowing who's lined up on both sides of the scrimmage once you're in the game?
So what I like to tell my callers here is, tell me, I'd rather you give me too much information than no information. So tell me huddle, no huddle. Tell me under center shotgun. Tell me who the running back is. If the running back changes on a play, let me know ahead of time. If there's 2 running backs, let me know. And that way you're prepared. Again, if I hear that number and then I hear you call a rush by another number, I'm going to look up and make sure. He told me 21 was in the backfield. Now he said rush 22. So we're going to look and make sure we put that right number in there.
What about entering starters? What process works best for you?
So what I like to do is, again, and it's tougher these days, I think, because less teams are putting out 2 deeps than we used to see. Everybody used to put out 2 deep. So if I have a 2 deep, I like to go with it. And then I'll make changes at halftime and end of game. If I don't have one, what I like to do is have my callers, when each team lines up for the first play from scrimmage, start yelling out numbers. We've got 15, 20 seconds after that kickoff return before the first snap. Yell out numbers, and me as the inputter, I can start circling numbers or writing numbers down, and then we can figure out later what positions they were in.
And then this last topic on inputting, either for you, Scott, or for Stan, what other sources other than video, which we discussed, can you use as a resource if you're unsure about a play you inputted? It could be, something on who blocked a punt or who forced a fumble, stuff that's very hard to see sometimes.
Well, I mean, I will say that there's every once in a while we reach out to the SID to say, hey, can you call down to the field and say who blocked the punt or who tipped the pass, or if we can't find it. A lot of my defensive guys tell me it's normally the guy that's celebrating the most. So by default, we might put that person, but we'll double check to verify that celebration was indeed genuine. But yeah, so we often will ask the SID to somehow confirm the information.
All right, I want to move on to a big part of this, which is recording basic statistics. And I'll bring in John Painter and Stan for this. Start with, what do you do if there's a last-minute jersey number change or someone swaps jerseys mid-game?
You want this one, John?
Well, I think you have a good way to handle it. You just stay with the original number, right? If you can, that's
yes.
If you can do that, that's who that was. The best thing for you is just stay with that original number.
And that's best because that's also what's in the system too. So
That's
now
right.
we're not having to make multiple changes throughout. So for sure.
By the way, in terms of game prep, we got one great tip in the Q&A from Ryan Hilgeman, who said, make sure that your Windows updates or computer updates are run and rebooted before the game starts, because you don't want that, the computer to automatically restart. So thank you for that, Ryan.
We had that happen at UCLA a couple of years ago, right in the middle of the game. So that's a great
tip. What about entering a yard line and spotting the ball, and also using tools such as where the side judge is? You guys want to discuss that?
Well, I mean, spotting the ball, I feel like this is the most important thing you do as a statistician. If you don't have this right, then everything else is falling apart. We're blessed to have every yard marker is out there now. You're not guessing, like a high school field is touching the 3 or whatever. You just there are certain plays you see that, like, it was a big run. Was it 9 or 10 on first down? And they have not indicated it's first down. That's pretty easy to tell you it's a 9-yard run. Even if the ball's touching the yard line, there are times where the ball's literally on the yard line that you think it would be a 10-yard run, but, and the world sees it's the 43, but you're going to call it the 42 just because the ball was slightly over that. So, you gotta, once you make your call, make your call. Don't change it because the refs respotted the ball after an incompletion 2 feet one way or the other, and that happens all the time. And don't change your call once the centers touch the ball either, because every center moves the ball, and if they're a good center, they're moving it forward. So those would be the things that immediately come to my mind is, we were talking about having a stat manual. I mean, I print it out, I have it electronically, and frankly, I read it every year. It doesn't change, but it's great bedtime reading. And then when a play happens, I know what it is. I just know it because I've read it so many times. So that's the blessing of having done it 20 years. So, but John, what did I miss?
Well, you missed that I would love to be on Stan's crew. I can tell you that right now. It'd be a great crew to be on. So, I would say don't be in a hurry to spot that ball. Right. Make that all. It's got to be almost the very last thing you're doing when that center grabs it, because they'll. How many times you see them go in there and they'll move it, at the last second. You go, So I would just say take your time on spotting that ball. Just don't be in a hurry on that one.
It's often the last thing that I call. I mean, I see the ball on the sideline. Now, if they went out of bounds and actually put the ball out of bounds on the marker, then I feel safe calling it. Otherwise, I'm going to wait till I actually see the ball put down on the ground, because too many times I've guessed wrong, and I'm just not going to guess wrong anymore.
And one thing I'd like to add, and you guys can chime in with that too, is don't believe what the scoreboard operator puts up.
Oh, never. Or the announcer. I mean, we have some good announcers, but this year he's been wrong about 20% of the time on yard lines or tackles. And it's like, it could be a helpful guide, but if you're basing everything on that, you're also in trouble.
How do you guys handle if you're, let's say the press box is off center and you're in the end zone or on the 10-yard line, sure, and the ball's on the other side of the field for spotting? I'm sure a lot of folks deal with that. How do you handle that?
At SC, I'm at one of the 20s. So if the ball is, on the other side, there have been times, I'll have one of my guys walk it and confirm the spot, if we can. We definitely have video at every SC game, so that helps confirm the call. When I was doing the Rams, we were tucked away in the corner of the end zone, and that was brutal. The spots, the 30-yard line to the end zone, were educated guesses half the time. And then we had the video on delay, so I would yell up to my scribe, "Hey, check that spot." In the end, you're just going to you got to do what you got to do. You're going to make your best educated guess. I like to use the first down markers, the yard line markers, to see where they're at, because a lot of times that's going to help me if I can't figure out where the ball is on the field. So don't be afraid to look at the markers, because that's what the officials are using. So
correct. You almost have no chance of telling whether that ball's at the 2 or the 1. So use that far marker, the far first down, right, the ball marker over there. The official will tell you where the ball is.
Especially when it's not touching a hash mark and you're not sure, is that nose of that ball touching, or is it off? Is it the 2? Is it the 3? Is it ahead? So those are obviously examples where you're just not going to be able to see, and you may have to rely on those other tools. Good question that came in during the Q&A from one of our attendees was, what are your recommendations when the officials mess up the spot of the ball? Because this never happens. For example, the ball was on the 35 at the end of the third quarter, but at the start of the fourth quarter, it's now on the 33, where they have a kick return, tackle it at the 43, and then suddenly in the next play, they're at the 45. Do you change that? How do you handle that?
Wow. I've had misspotted penalties all the time. I've had a lot of 9 and 4-yard penalties in my life, but I'm not sure that I've actually had the ball misspotted from going from quarter to quarter like they're describing. I would say the one on the kickoff is that I see a lot of respots, though. I especially in the NFL, I see this all the time. The ball's put down and then suddenly it backs up a yard or two just before the play starts. So somehow somebody decided that, no, they were down here or the fair catch was here. But so that one is easy because you're just marking it where the official line of scrimmage really is. Misspotting on a quarter, I'm going to have to defer to John because I have a feeling he's probably had this one happen to him once.
we had a play last year. Team kicked off fair catch, right at the 17 or whatever. So the program puts the ball to 25. We have a rushing play. Looks like he gains a couple yards. I was inputting at the time. My guy goes, okay, ball's now at the 19. I said, wait. Why is the ball at the 19? The ball shouldn't be at the 19. It should be at the 27. And sure enough, it was at the 19. They had put it where he fair caught it. And then they threw an incomplete pass and we're still off. And then the coach went crazy and said, and then they moved the ball to the 27. So we were back in good shape again. Got lucky there, but I was just riding it out. I was saying, okay, we need about a 15-yard gain here or something. But I need something to happen here. But yeah, I think just ride it out. If you're correct and maybe the officials are wrong, because it's going to be tough on you to go back and make a lot of those changes. And thankfully, like I said, in that case, they recognized it 2 plays later and put the ball at the 27. Yeah, then you're just going to have to make your own call there, whether you want to, back up 2 plays and start it over, and then that's up to you. But sometimes you just gotta keep rolling.
And I think Stan, I think Stan mentioned it earlier though. Like if it's a situation where it's an incomplete pass and the ball moves back a yard, or maybe it even moves back 2 yards or something, generally speaking, you're going to probably keep it on that yard line that it was for the previous play. So maybe that's the situation. If they flip the field for the next quarter and it's moved a yard or whatever, you probably are going to want to keep it on where you had it for that previous play. But again, like I think John and Stan both said, you're sort of just going to have to do the best you can in that situation and understand that, it's going to be a little bit unique situation there. So.
And particularly if there's a play in between, I would always trust the original spot, because you're going to see examples where it's 1st and 10 at the 10, and then 2nd and 10 from the 9, and then it's 3rd and 10 from the 10. So, this happens more often than not.
Yeah.
Speaking of officials, and this was a question that came in through our Q&A, but certainly is a problem during game days. How do you handle penalties in particular when you cannot hear the referee or not sure what the penalty is or who it's on?
I think you got to do a couple things. Again, use not only, as Jeff mentioned earlier, you can use the stats manual, but near that page, also on NCAA.org, they'll have publications with the rules manuals, and it has official signals. Have a printout of that so you can see the preliminary signal. Again, we know referee mics too in the wind. We can't hear them at some big D1 games because the wind is howling. We can't hear the official at all. So we have to go by, we see what the signal is from the official, and then we'll go by that and see it mark off. And then if you have a chance later on, maybe you can see, maybe the TV broadcast picked it up, and you can get it from closed captioning. You can also, depending on the level of game, obviously if there's a replay official and it's near halftime or something, you may be able to go ask them, and they may be able to provide you information.
John, what about you? I'm sure you've run into this.
Yeah, you just, like I said, there's no great answer for it, just other than you've got to put a play in. I got a perfect one. We had this past week. They said sideline interference penalty on Maryville. So we inputted sideline interference and it marked it off 5 yards, but they marked it off 15 yards. So I said, whoa. So we went back. I said, you got to make it a personal foul. Maybe it was such an egregious sideline. Maybe we drilled the ref or something. So I changed it to a personal foul to get the 15 yards. I needed the ball to be back at the 30 and not the 40. So that's what we just did that quickly. Made that on the fly.
And this is really important. Like as best you can, you're not gonna. It's like anything else. You can't always know all the rules. You can't know all the situations. But as much of the rules as you know, the better. Because in John's situation, this might be a situation where the officials got it wrong. But there is differing levels of some of these things. So like I think I may not even get this right, but I think sideline infractions are like the first one has one penalty, which is a warning. The second one is a 5 yard, and the third one is a 15. So like understanding like those different scenarios of when those penalties go into effect is really helpful. And again, it's hard to know all of them. I mean, I've been doing this almost 30 years now, and there's still some plays that somebody will email me that I have to look in our stat manual to interpret, because I don't know everything all the time, or I just want to confirm that I understand it. So don't hesitate to be willing to go back and look and understand it. But certainly knowing the rules, knowing the stat rules and things like that are really helpful in advance as much as you can. But also knowing that like the best way to learn it is to get the experience and see those situations that happen.
Let's move on to some additional plays. Stan, how would you score differentiate run pass option versus rushing, or a lateral versus a pitch,
Right.
shovel passes? Would you want to talk about deciphering some of what you see out on the field?
Yes, I mean, the RPO has definitely become a major part of the game, and you have to sort of try to get inside the head of your quarterback a little bit and understand what they are doing. Sometimes it's helpful to see, are the receivers even looking for a pass? Because sometimes they're just down the field blocking. So that's a great indication that this is a run all the way. We see a lot of jet sweeps that now are basically a 6-inch pass forward, and that is a pass, and we're always looking for that. SC especially likes to throw the ball horizontally, so there's unintentional laterals that happen almost once a game. So you got to be alert for the backward pass. It's just, I think the biggest thing is what I've discovered is you got to keep your eyes on the field. Okay, the moment you put your head down is the moment you're losing contact with the game. But as far as like an RPO, I'm going to make an immediate call. My crew knows that he can challenge me on any call at any time, because our goal is to get it right. Not that I'm perfect. But most of the time, to me, and I guess just because I've done this for so long and watched so much football and played it and etc., I can just sort of instinctually feel like, okay, he put the ball down and this was a run. This is not a scramble. Okay. And there's the difference, was this an original intent to pass, or was it a quarterback draw? So he was sort of faking it. And then again, there's another one that you have to sort of, guess what was the intent. So the biggest thing I could say is, I don't know how to say it other than know the game. I hate saying it's a feel, but there are things you can look for. Look for the receivers. Are they even looking for a pass? Because if they're not, it's a run. And be aware that little pitch forward is a pass. Okay, not a hand, or was it a handoff? Because that happens sometimes too. Still, so you got to be careful. Did the ball actually leave his hands or not? So. I'm certainly happy to defer to someone else who maybe has a little bit better guidance on this.
No, I think the key.
Go ahead, Scott.
The key to what Stan says is this also affects sacks. I mean, if it's not a pass play, it's a run and a tackle for loss. If I've got a pass, now I've got a sack. So again, go with your gut. Watch what the linemen are doing. Watch what the receivers are doing.
And that's where you get your defense coordinators upset, because they're thinking, oh, that's a sack. No, that was a run all the way.
I had a defensive coordinator tell me, oh, that was a sack. I said, well, coach, he took the snap and he ran right into the line. He goes, yeah, because we had everything covered. And I went, no, it's not. I'm sorry. It doesn't. I said, coach, maybe he ran the wrong play. You ever think about that? Now, Stan, let me ask you, on those horizontal passes, are you looking for the official to give you a signal, or are you just eyeballing?
Most of the time I'm going to eyeball it. If it's a 50-50, we will try to defer to the official, but I've noticed our Pac-12 officials are, they don't have a lot of courage, and they're going to say a pass was a forward pass when it was definitely a lateral. And I guess in a way we're supposed to be historians, but if I can plainly see as day, it was a lateral, and it was, if you will, a completed lateral, then that's what I'm calling, regardless of what the sideline officials said. So,
and this is where video comes in. Something that I have to look at a lot in the NFL, Scott, I'm sure you're dealing with it as well, is on these plays that are parallel with the line. Obviously, that's a rush versus a pass, and it has big fantasy implications for people who play it. I watch very closely, maybe 2-3 times on video, where the ball was released by the quarterback and where it was caught by the potential receiver, to see whether it was a lateral or it was a forward pass. And a lot of times you don't have a lot to work on if it's in between hash marks. Something else I'll also recommend to those who are newer scorers, and something that I did many years ago when I was learning football, I would actually watch some college games not as an SID, or I'm sorry, not as a fan, but as an SID, and put the scorer hat on and watched watched the game and then compared it to, live stats back then were not great, but to the live stats, and saw how it was scored, so I could see what others did for situations I wasn't sure of. And I think even today that could be a helpful tip on, even on if you are watching an NFL game, watch the live stats, which are obviously very quick, and see on these tricky plays how it was scored. A lot of that is going to translate directly to the college game. Want to definitely touch on another one that is important in today's game, which is the intended target on a pass play, which can be very tricky. Stan, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the intended target. So again, you're sort of trying, if they're throwing it to the sideline, the question then becomes, was he throwing it away or was he trying to complete the pass? More often than not, especially if it's 10 yards deep into the sidelines, that's a pretty good indication they were throwing it away and there was no intended receiver. The middle of the field, very rarely are they throwing away. Every once in a while they do, but most of the time they actually are trying to complete the pass. And the hard part of the intended target often is the interception, because we get so caught up, at least I get caught up in identifying where the interception took place, who intercepted it, that we lose who was the intended target. So yeah, and sometimes it's challenging because if it's an overthrow or it's a throw between two receivers, was it an overthrow or was it an underthrow, right? So again, sometimes those are a little bit of a judgment call, but definitely on the sideline ones, especially if it's deep in the sidelines, that's a pretty good indication. Or maybe they just chucked it down the field and it's 10 yards beyond the receiver, but most of the time though, if it's in the middle of the field, there's an intent to complete the pass, almost always. So then you need to have a target there, but a lot of times the sideline ones actually are throwaways. So,
and I think to add to that, obviously the ones where the defensive lineman blocks the ball right at the line of scrimmage, it's really hard.
yes.
Where is throwing to? Because the play hasn't finished developing sometimes. And again, that's where the benefits of, depending what level you're at, having replay, if you can get that end zone angle and see where the quarterback's looking, that may help you find your intended target.
We have about 20 minutes left, so if anybody has questions, continue to use the Q&A function. I'm going to ask two questions now before we move on to some other items. And this one's from Eric Burdick, who asks, Muff versus fumble. If a returner momentarily drops the ball as he's trying to catch it and immediately picks it up and starts to return, how do you score that? Because sometimes it's easier as a scorer to just ignore the initial drop. Scott, your thoughts?
I definitely go with the muff. I think of muff as you drop the catch itself and you pick it right up and go, or you muff it right at the catch and then your opponents pick it up. To me, a fumble is after I've gained full possession and I've started my return. Most of the times when we credit muffs, you're going to see it's one return for 0 yards because the muff happens at that point of the return. So that's how I usually determine muff versus fumble.
Dan, how about in a situation where there's a fumble recovery on a punt and it hits a player running down the field?
Well, so I guess the question becomes, is it offense or defensive player in a sense? But I mean, in that case, that's going to be a fumble because there was no attempt to catch the ball. So you're almost calling like a fire drill where the punt was short, hit one of the blockers who was inadvertently touched the ball. So that one I'm going to call it a fumble. I won't call that a muff because there was no attempt to make the catch. It doesn't really matter who actually recovered it in that regard. But that to me is the ultimate. That's your fumble versus the receiver is the returner is under it, drops it. The ball hits the ground, you're going to have to mark that. Okay, that's we can't just have that disappear. So that's the difference between a muff and a fumble potentially on that play.
Jeff Williams, linebacker, times the snap perfectly. I'm watching a lot of game film, and he tackles the quarterback before it can be determined if it's a pass or rush play. NCAA manual, would you rule that a sack?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Scott said this earlier. A lot of that is going to be a judgment call by you, and I think what the guys were saying, what Stan and Scott are saying here about, you could still probably get a sense of what the offensive line is doing, what the receivers are doing, and have an idea. I will say, generally speaking, in a situation like that, I'm probably going to, if the quarterback has the ball. And it happens right away, and it looks like he's taking a step back, I'm probably going to lean on the side of a sack. I'm just probably going to lean that way, but it's really going to be a judgment call. It's probably going to be different in every situation. So if he times it that perfectly, the old I think it was the old LeVar Arrington play from many years ago. If it's timed that perfectly, it really is. It's difficult. It's going to have to be a judgment call. I probably would give the benefit of the doubt to go towards sack, but I think every scorer would kind of have to do that on their own judgment.
And how would you like to see quarterback hurries awarded? One of our attendees asked, kind of the Wild West right now, where there are some places that actually credit multiple hurries on a play.
Yeah. So I don't think I would do that. I think, and I know it's not in the stat manual, and that's probably going to change here in the next year or so, but to me, a quarterback hurry is akin to a pass breakup. And so a quarterback hurry should only occur on an incomplete pass, would be my interpretation of it. And it should essentially lead to the incomplete pass. And so the quarterback hurry would be the person who sort of put the pressure on the quarterback, flushed them out of the pocket, rushed them right up the middle, and was the reason the quarterback got rid of it quickly, or whatever. Now, I know some people tend to think that, like, if he threw it short because he was hurried, instead of throwing it downfield where he wanted to me, that's just a check down. That's not a quarterback hurry in my mind. So I think a quarterback hurry really has to result in an incomplete pass, and it probably should be one person and it's not like an assisted situation. John had something to say too.
Yeah, it's like a block shot and the ball goes in the basket. It's not blocking, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in fact, I think I used that very scenario just the other day. So, you wouldn't rule a block shot if the ball went in the basket. Same idea. No quarterback hurry if the ball's completed.
And that's I still have to tell my defense that, like, it's like, if it's completed, can't be a hurry. It can't be a hurry. End of story. There is no hurry. Interception, yeah, I've seen interceptions due to hurries, so you can you can award that. But yeah, there's a couple. My defense is getting better because I look at them on a completed pass that probably would have been a hurry if not for a great catch, and they're about to say something, and then they go, "Oh yeah, he caught it."
Yeah, because you can have a hurry, a breakup, and an interception all in one play, right?
Sure, correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. But or a hurry and a breakup, but you wouldn't give a breakup if the pass were completed, right? Like if the offensive lineman tipped it at the line of scrimmage, but it popped up and the running back caught it and gained 5 yards, you wouldn't give a pass breakup on that, right? Same idea to me on a quarterback hurry. So.
We have a little bit more than 10 minutes left, so I want to jump into some difficult, unusual play discussions. And we'll start with everybody's favorite, which is turnovers. Can you guys talk about, and let's start with Scott this time. Really three areas that often cause confusion: sacks, sack fumbles, interceptions, and then the ever favorite miscellaneous fumble.
Yeah, so I think obviously the big thing right now is, and this is where Jeff was talking about earlier, reading the stat manual, is the sack fumble and the sack. NCAA rules say it has to be negative. Now, for guys like Ira, Stan, and me with the NFL, sometimes we got to remember that when we switch between games because we can do 0-yard sacks. But here in the NCAA, it's got to be negative. And so we see this a lot. Normally, the ball does end up going backwards behind the line of scrimmage. But in those rare cases where the ball is recovered in front of the line of scrimmage, it's no longer a sack fumble, but a rush fumble. So again, this is where having a scribe really helps, as well as your inputter, because your inputter is you're not thinking about, hey, the ball went backwards, I'm going to call a sack fumble too right away, and then I'll correct it later. If I say sack fumble back at the 15, but recovered up to the 25 because the ball got batted around, I'm going to input it that way, and then I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I've got to gain on this play, so now I need to turn this into a rush play.
Yeah.
So it's just think about all the yard lines on every play, and again, we know sometimes with turnovers, you've got 6 voices yelling at you. So again, it's hearing the information you need. And this is where it helps with your crew setup, is talking to your crew ahead of game. Tell me what information you want me to give you on a turnover play. There are 4 or 5 things I need to have. Again, we can figure out intended targets later, everything else. And then something else we see a lot with sack fumbles is we know 2 guys may get there at the same time. Only 1 guy knocks the ball out. So there's only 1 forced fumble on that play. And that's the person that's going to get credit for the sack fumble. I know sometimes coaches are like, well, they both got there. Well, it's like, that's fine. Only 1 player can actually knock the ball out of the quarterback's hands, and they're the person that's going to get credit for that fumble.
And just so you know, the reasoning behind that, while they both may have been the one that made a sack. Essentially, once that ball's fumbled, that play, that sack is terminated at that point, and that's why it's just that one person. And so that's why you wouldn't get like an assisted sack in a sack fumble situation.
And again, I like how to also think, going back with sacks, is think about really when you're putting 2 players in, did that second player actually contribute to the sack? If that first player's got him wrapped up and then the second player comes in, but the quarterback was never getting out, give the first guy the full credit, because he wasn't going to get out just because the second guy came in and knocked him over. If this guy's not going to get out of the pressure, give the first player the full sack.
What about a partially blocked punt?
This one's always difficult for me, again, because you have to determine, and it's hard to determine right in the moment, did it fully get blocked, and did that substantially affect the punt distance? Because again, I can get my fingertips on it, but the ball still goes 40 yards. That's no longer a punt blocked. Now, if I got my fingertips on it and it ends up going out of bounds 10 yards, now I'm probably giving a punt block. But you got to look at the whole situation, what was happening, and did it substantially affect it? And that's what I like to do. Stan, I don't know if you look at it differently.
No, actually, we had a play this weekend at UCLA where it was a very poor punt. It was like about a 20-yarder, and the oncoming defender, I didn't think got a piece of the ball, but it was close enough for me to ask the guys, did he touch it or not, or was it just a bad punt? We all agreed. My original thought was, yeah, it was just a bad punt. But, you got to, I'm always looking for, and then what was funny is we were discussing, well, how do you stat that? And I knew how to stat it, but the 2 guys that I was talking to didn't. So I had them look up the rule, and there it was. And I was like, so we're always using those kind of in-game things. Like, well, if it was a block punt, how would you stat it? Okay. Or if partially blocked punt in this case. So, I think coaches like to do like rain practices. So this is perfect because we may play in the rain. Same thing with statisticians. You think you've got something that actually didn't. It's a good idea to practice how would you have handled that play had it actually been a partially blocked punt, kind of thing. So,
and the question we get on that a lot, Ira, just so you guys know, I mean, the question we get is like, what's the yardage, right? Like Scott said, well, if it went 40 yards, I might not give it because, it wouldn't have affected the distance that much. But it's hard. It's really impossible to give a yardage because you could have a ball that, it got blocked. So now it's end over end. It lands 10 yards down the field and rolls 20 yards, and it's a 30-yard punt. Was that block? Did that affect?
A couple other topics that are certainly relevant. Recording tackles, unassisted versus assisted. John Panner.
Yeah, I just want the person, if it, as Scott just mentioned, if one person was really the responsible and the other person just jumped on the pile, you don't have to include that second person, So I think that's just your judgment and really who caused. Was there a fingertip trip, before he was covered by a big pile of people? So that can happen too. So. And that's where your binoculars really kind of come in handy, by the way. So because there's a pile of humanity, in there at the 1 yard line, you just got to do the best you can with those binoculars.
Jeff Williams' question in the Q&A. So just to clarify, if a sack fumbles recovered at the line of scrimmage or ahead of it, then you just have to go and score it as a rush recovery with no sack. Or is that correct?
He's not here. I'll handle that one for him. Yes. So if the ball gains, if it's at the line of scrimmage or plus yardage, it's no longer a sack.
Right.
It's just, and I'm already hearing the defense coordinator yelling at me. Okay. I mean, I get it,
Yeah.
but the fact is, if it's plus yardage, you can't have a sack that's plus yardage,
Right.
or even in the NCAA, or even 0 yards. Okay, so for the definition of a sack for NCAA standards is there's a loss, no sack.
And that includes, there's no such thing as a half-yard loss either.
Correct.
Coaches are like, oh, wait, you lost a half yard. You can see it on the film. I go, who is somebody leading the country this year with 1,214 and a half yards? No, there's no half yards in stats, So
That is correct.
And that's one of the big differences between the NFL and college. In the NFL, if you don't gain yardage, it's a sack. If there is no 0 yards, 0 yards is a sack in the NFL. We're going to wrap up in penalties in a moment, but we have a couple other questions I just want to get to. One attendee wants to know, he had a play where the offense was on their own 1 yard line, and the center snapped the ball over the punter's head and straight out of bounds through the end zone. Obviously, it's a safety, but you want to talk about how scoring that. Let's go with Scott in this one.
In this case, I'm probably just going to go team rush for the negative yardage and credit the safety. Because again, you can't give a punt. No punt happens. You're not going to give a pass. So your only option is to give a team rush.
Yep. Yeah, that's actually pretty straightforward one. The bad center snap that the quarterback punter can't handle. You're in team rush zone at that point. So,
Stan, while I have you, there's another question from one of our attendees. There's a lot of plays, such as a QB sneak, where we can't see who should be awarded the tackle, and that's something we all encounter, obviously.
Sure.
One look from the press box live sometimes doesn't lead to the right outcome. Outside relying on a TV angle, do SIDs, college or NFL, go back through the games to make those defensive corrections? I'll let you answer the college one because I can tell.
Yeah, I'll let you handle. I'm not
doing
doing the NFL anymore, so I'm going to let you handle that. I every once in a while get a stat correction request from the visiting team a day or two after, but it's pretty rare. And especially on that play, I think they're going to go with whoever we went with. I don't think I've ever had a visiting SID on a quarterback sneak say no, it wasn't. And almost always it's going to be 2 people. We're going to split that almost certainly. That's going to be 2 assists on that play. So. Just an offshoot of that, at UCLA had a blowout win this week, and they ran the ball, and the other team ran the ball. Both teams wanted to go home. My defense stat person was really upset because they were splitting tackles right and left. And I said, well, running plays tend to lead themselves to multiple assists. Pass plays tend to be, unassisted. And I was like, and both teams just ran the heck out of the ball. So I'm not telling you to do it that way, but just the nature of the game is running the ball between the tackles. You're probably going to have assist on a lot of plays. So you can handle the NFL.
And I'll say in the NFL, you can be rest assured they're reviewing every single play. We'll get a report every single Wednesday that discusses all the changes made in games around the league, and you don't want to see your name on that report. I'm thankful in week 1 against the Bills, we were not listed at all, so no changes were made. But everything can be changed, and we get graded. We actually get grades. The closest to 0, the better. We had a 0.25 in week number 1.
There you go.
You want to have as close to 0 as possible, but they will. Listen, if you miss a tackle, they're going to change it. They'll sometimes confer with Elias if it's a tricky play, which is actually very helpful to have a second opinion on it. But players' contracts, gambling, fantasy football, there's so many nuances now where we have to be right. And again, Stan said, we don't have any kind of ego with this. We just want it to be right. So if it is changed, then it's changed, and that's the right call. Before we get to the penalty topic, and then we'll wrap up, and an attendee asked, how do you handle, oh boy, Stan, how do you handle lateral passes like something we saw in the Miami Miracle?
All right. Well, all right. Refresh my memory. I'm sorry. So are we talking like a lateral pass and then the receiver throws it essentially? Is that what we're thinking?
I think it's like 5 or 6 laterals.
Yeah, 5 or 6.
Oh, okay. I got you. All right. So literally, normally in those kind of plays, you sort of know it's coming, right? We always have a piece of paper. I've got a pencil, and I'm going to start barking off every pitch, where, who had it, where they caught it, and we're just writing it all down, and we're just taking in the play. And then we're going to go back through and try to figure out how to put that all back into the system. But we're not statting that one live into the computer at that point. That one, we're going to count every pitch, and then, I'm blessed Division I. I'm going to get a chance to see a replay and verify some of those spots. So that's normally something I'm really good at. But yeah, I mean, those plays you should know are coming. I mean, it's so be prepared for it. I mean, have everybody ready to jot the information down and call it out. That's the thing, is be ready. You don't take extra points for granted. Assume that it's going to get blocked, right? So it's when you assume that the kicker's never missed an extra point, well, that's the one that's going to get blocked, right? So you need to be awake for the play, I guess I would say. So,
and especially for new statisticians, something to remember is on those plays, you either have a completed lateral or you have a fumble. There's no such thing as an incomplete lateral. So if the guy drops the ball, it's going to be a fumble and not a lateral to the next player.
Right.
And then the fumble adds a whole set of circumstances that you don't want to have to deal with, but be ready.
Yeah.
And as Stan said, just tell everybody on the crew that it's coming, just in case they're not focused on it, and verbalize to the crew, be ready for a lateral.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Last quick topic, and then we will wrap up. Penalties. I know this trips up a lot of people. John, determining does the play count, where you mark the penalty from, is the distance of the penalty assessed correctly? Your thoughts?
Yeah, are you using Stat Crew Presto, or are you using NCAA Live Stats? Know your program and know how they want you to enter the stats, enter the penalties that way, because they are different. The newer program, the Genius Live Stats, you just put the plays that happen, and then it automatically puts the penalty back there. But if you're doing Stat Crew, okay, then the return's only to the 28 and the penalty's back to the 18. You just have to know in the program what it needs from you.
Stan, Scott, any other thoughts on penalties?
I think just go ahead, Stan.
I was going to just say, does a play count? Like if it's holding down the field on a run and the running back's going to get 5 yards, and then, the penalty is now pushing it back, 10. Yeah, that play counts to the degree the running back's going to get 5 yards in this example. So then that play stands. If everything's happening at the line of scrimmage, the term we use is play is nullified. It doesn't take place. So you got to know where the spot of the foul is. And I'm going to defer to Scott on the rest of this.
Yeah, and then the only other thing I really want to add is, and we're seeing it a lot more this year with unsportsmanlike conducts, tauntings, targetings, is understanding did the play count and where are we enforcing this? So a lot of times listen for that referee cue if they're mic'd up after the play. That means the play counts and we move on. We've seen times where there's an incomplete pass and then the defender, happy that he thinks he did something, decides to taunt the receiver. Well, now the incomplete pass is done, the play's over, but now I've got a 15-yard penalty. Well, that play counts, the pass is incomplete counts, the receiver gets a target, but now I've got a penalty and I'm going to enforce it that next down. And then while that should result in a first down, there could be other penalty types where it's not going to be a first down. So just understanding what's also an automatic first down versus what's not, and making sure your down and distance is correct for that next play.
Some plays can have 2 first downs. The running back gets 11 yards and then a late hit on him. And now suddenly you've got a rushing first down and a first down by penalty. So that happens almost every game, frankly. It's pretty, I could almost count it would be rare for there to be a game where there aren't 2 first downs on a play. That happens a lot.
And I would just add, and Scott kind of touched on it too. And first of all, I apologize if you guys that I was off for just a few minutes. We were talking about technology. Technology got me. So, but with that in mind, Scott touched on it. But like listening to the official, what they say, was it, does it go back to the original spot and get marked off there? Is it marked off from the end of the play? Or things like that. And we talked about it. Sometimes you can't hear what the official says related to that. So again, kind of having an understanding of the rules and what happens, when there is a a targeting penalty, it usually is going to be after the play. Not always. Sometimes it's part of the incomplete pass, right? But sometimes, a lot of times, that dead ball, unsportsmanlike, is going to be after the play. So just kind of having an understanding of the rules of the game and knowing that is really helpful as well. So again, you get a lot of that from experience. I get that. But just having some of those basic understandings going in is really, really helpful.
Well, guys, that's all the time we have for today. I want to give a big thank you to all of our presenters today, Scott Fishman, Stan Grench, John Painter, and Jeff Williams. We appreciate you guys for all your discussion today and the insights. Again, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available for anybody who missed it or wants to watch it again on demand. So please share that information with your colleagues. We also encourage you to check our website, collegesportscommunicators.com, for updated information on what's on tap for his CSE programming and continuing education. Coming up in October, we'll be offering a volleyball stats and rules session, and also a session on using social media data and analytics. So stay tuned for those dates to be announced. That's all the time we have today. We thank everybody for joining us, and be well, everybody.